Alright, so I'm new to this. This is going to be my first video, but I've been asked to do this a lot. So now that I actually have the time, I'm gonna finally cave and I'm gonna make videos on how I make different sewing stuff. Now, I'm gonna warn you, some of my sewing techniques are not like everybody else's. I'm self-taught with most things that I do, but I've been sewing for over 20 years and I've learned a lot of things from other people as well. So I'm going to share with you how I sew, and that doesn't mean that it's the right or the wrong way. So keep in mind, if you do something different, don't worry. It's not like wrong or anything like that. We just do it a different way, and that's okay. So today I'm going to show you how to make these Smart Doll skirts. Some of you might have seen me put these on for sale for advertisement. They're just cute little corduroy skirts. You'll see it folds over here. All the lining inside it is finished. This one, because it's a light color, doesn't have the lining that goes down into the skirt. However, the darker one does. You see the fabric comes down all the way to kind of help prevent staining. And then in the back, it has little snaps that snap closed to go over their little booties. In the front, it's got some cute little decorative buttons, and you could kind of do whatever you want with how you want to decorate the front of it. So this is a pattern I did make myself. Most of the stuff that I do make, I make based off of a pattern that I create either individually for the item I'm making, or sometimes I save the pattern, and sometimes it's a pattern I already have that I will alter. So skirts. What you need, you don't necessarily need to have the exact same kind of fabric that I have. You can use anything. So I've got lining fabric, and today I'm going to use some red corduroy, well, it's kind of burgundy, to make the outer part of it. You need some snaps for the closures, and then I have buttons and stuff for decoration. These I got at Walmart, so they were pretty cheap. I also have some of these. I might actually use these cute little red flowers on this one. But I find a whole bunch of this kind of stuff at a local store called S.R. Harris, and I'll bring it home with me. And then sometimes I use a little chalk pen. You can also use like just the normal drawing chalk and all that kind of stuff, but this helps to create the pattern on the fabric. And then of course you need a tape measure, and you need a trusty sewing machine. So I have an industrial sewing machine, but any sewing machine would work for this. Sorry, I dropped my phone out of the thing. So for the most part, I'm probably not going to edit these videos yet. Mostly because I'm new at doing this. And a lot of this information is going to be really useful for people. So I have a pattern that I created for this skirt. So we're going to start off with that. So here's the pattern, and I'm going to give you guys some measurements. So this is the top part of it, and it looks like it's 5 inches across the top, and you'll notice there's a little dip down here. That's to help mold to where the waist part of it is. It follows that dip down here as well. So the bottom part of it, let's do this in centimeters. That's a little more accurate. So the bottom part's 16 centimeters. The very top part is 13 centimeters. The side seam is 10 centimeters. And so is that center part here. And that's for the front. The back is also 10 centimeters long, which makes sense because that's how long you want it to be. It's 8 centimeters at the top, and it's just over 11 centimeters at the bottom. You see it comes out just a little tiny bit over. So this is 1/2 of the back. You need 2 of those. This is the entire front. You only need 1 of those of each of the fabrics that you're going to use. So you need 1 of them for the top front, and then 2 for the top back of this fabric, and then the same for this. So technically you end up with 2 and 4. So when you're beginning sewing, this is where your chalk is going to come in handy. I don't always use it. You'll probably notice in some of my future videos that I won't always do this part. But I'm going to show you how to do this for those of you that are new. So you'll want to kind of line it up to get as little waste as possible. And this pattern is already created for the overlap in the back, so don't worry about that. And then this little guy just gives me a little chalk line. This is probably where I'll edit out some of this stuff, because you won't need to see me tracing this whole thing. So when I lift it, I'm not sure if you can see that on the video, but there's a really light little line that goes all around. And get my scissors. So I have both big scissors and I have thread scissors. You don't necessarily need to. I just find it easier to work with both. Sometimes people will pin these pieces together if they're worried about their fabric shifting. Sometimes slippery fabrics like satins and stuff will shift from each other. This fabric, however, sticks together pretty well, so I'm not concerned about that, but just so you're aware, sometimes that helps significantly to just put a pin even just in the center of the pattern in the middle to help hold the fabric pieces together. So I'm just going to cut this next one out without worrying about the tracing. So there's a little seam right here. I'll fold my pattern in half, and then this is one of the unorthodox ways that I like doing some of this stuff, because I do it so often. I just hold the pattern in place. And there we have it, my piece for the front. Sometimes when you've been doing this kind of stuff long enough, you don't need to trace it quite so much, but sometimes it makes things a lot easier. So with the other skirt that I made, I did make a protective layer on the inside. So what I did so that we didn't end up with too much bulk is I did a rough torn edge. So I snipped this and ripped. And because this next fabric is red, I'm gonna make an inner lining for it as well, just so that we can protect our dolls from potential staining, because we all hate that. So you'll notice you'll get some little loose strings on this. Just pull them and they'll come off. And this piece of fabric doesn't need to be as wide as the pleating that you've got for the outer part of the fabric, but you do want this to be a little bit wider so that when she sits and stuff, it doesn't feel too stiff. So that way she actually can still have her movement and everything. So This, I kind of free handed it in the last ones when I cut this piece out. So I'm gonna use one of my skirts as a reference. So this part of it, now we have to make sure we're adding the seam allowance too, is 8 centimeters long. So I'm gonna mark that 8 centimeters with my piece of chalk here so that I know how long I need to make the inner lining part to protect from the red. You can go across and do a few lines so that way as you cut it out, everything will be the same length. All right. I'm just going to cut along my lines. I'm going to set that aside with my inner lining pieces. So the next part essentially is a repeat of the first part, just with your outer fabric. It's a really nice soft corduroy. I actually got this from an estate sale quite some time ago, which is another reason why I'm making sure to line all of these things, because I don't know how old this fabric is. I don't know, you know, it's dye lot or anything to do with that kind of stuff. Come on, string. My sewing machine wants to fight a little. I'm trying to tuck this under the foot so that I can hold it in place. All right, so I'm going to show you a shortcut that I like to use when it comes to cutting out some patterns. You don't have to do this. Some people, this takes time, but as I've stated before, everybody's technique is a little bit different. So when you do this, sometimes what you can do is you can take and you can use these inner linings as your pattern, which is what I like to do, because then they're exactly the same. So this is my front piece that was folded in half. So at this point, one thing you could do is use little pins to pin this in place, and this is kind of what I was talking about with the other one too. So sometimes just pinning right through the center here, like so, will hold those pieces together. And make sure they're lined up at that center. And see, now that's not going to budge. So if I cut around that edge, it's going to be just fine. If that makes you uncomfortable, don't worry about it. Just take your handy little piece of chalk and draw your little chalk lines all around it. And this can help hold it in place so you don't have to worry about it going anywhere. Like so. And then you have your little chalk lines underneath so that they match exactly with your pattern that you've got. As you can see, I'm cutting it a little bit away from that edge. I just prefer doing that because sometimes I'll use fabric scraps and stuff from previous projects to do different things like this, and I'll have, like, if I cut the pattern this way, it'll leave a little snip here, and I don't want to run into that because I've done that before, and it's so annoying when it happens because then you waste a chunk of fabric and it just is frustrating. So I'm going to free this from underneath my sewing machine's foot, and I'm just going to kind of cut around here so that I've got just this chunk of fabric here. I'm going to set this aside. All right. So you see I've got these two pieces right here pretty close, because I can just snip through here, and that makes it so that there's less waste. Alright, so there's that one. I'm going to set that guy aside there. Now, some people, when they're doing stuff like this, they always stress that everything has to be absolutely perfect, kind of like making a quilt. It doesn't. Sometimes if you have one piece that you cut accidentally a little bit too small, you're going to have issues then. But if you cut the pieces a little bit too big, it isn't a big deal. If you look really close right here, you can see there's a teeny little bit, it's like just microscopic right there on that edge, where one of these pieces is just a tiny little bit longer than the next. Don't freak out over that. It's not a big deal. When you sew that together, nobody's even going to notice that that's there. Alright, so now the last piece that you're going to need is going to be the pleated part of the skirt. Now I use the entire width of the fabric when I do this. So I'm gonna fold this so that you can kind of see what I'm about to do. Because right now this fabric edge, you can see, is messy and uneven. But when we cut this out, we're gonna fix that, because we want our corduroy to look nice. So, if you remember correctly, we measured our inner lining part for the inside of the skirt to protect our girls from the staining. And then, I think it was 11 centimeters, no, it was 8. All right, so we're gonna double that and add 1 extra centimeter because we want this outside fabric to be just slightly longer, because you don't want to see this. So 8 and 8 is 16, and then we're gonna add 1 more for 17 centimeters. So I'm gonna use my little chalk guy mark my 17 centimeters, and as you can see, I'm a little ways away from this edge because this edge is an issue. So the next step that I'm gonna do is actually straighten this edge out. So you can use a ruler for this part. Some people like to use those nice little rolly gadgets. I have one of those, but I don't have a mat set down for it right now. So I'm just gonna wing it like this and use my tape measure. So if you don't have a rolly mat or the fancy little rolly dude, don't worry about it, because this works just fine. You don't need the fancy tools, all that kind of stuff, just some basic things to be able to do a lot of these things that I'm going to teach you. You'll notice not all my videos too will be Smart Doll stuff. Hold on. Alright, so now I'm gonna cut out this skirt piece. And this is one thing I do that sometimes people don't do. I just cut the line like this without pinning it. Sometimes that makes people really nervous. So, for those of you that are more cautious or want to do pinning, or you have a different technique that you use, it's just fine. You can pin along this line so the fabric won't move, like so. And in some of my videos you'll see how I pin stuff together as well. So I do use these little pins and stuff. It's just sometimes I don't. especially if it's a really straight piece like this, but everybody's different. So I'm gonna try my best to kind of cover multiple different techniques that can be used in creating this stuff so that you can find what works best for you. So as I cut this out, you notice this fabric now didn't shift or anything like that. All right, so now we have all of our pattern pieces, our lining, and our outer pieces done. This is all we need to make the skirt when it comes to fabric. All right, so we need to put our pattern together. So you want to match face to face the edge. You want to leave a little seam allowance. Usually I use my foot pedal, but 1/4 inch is also measured out on my little feed dog plate. That's on my sewing machine there. And most sewing machines will have those measurements. If not, you can even draw a little line on your machine foot plate to help. You notice as I go, because each piece is a little bit different shaped, I match them up together. And there's our first piece. And we do the same with the other side. Now I always snip my little tails off as I go. I always find it a little bit easier on cleanup later. So there's our inner lining. And the sewing, you can't see the threads or anything through there. So this is our edge piece for the bottom. And mine is cut extra long right now. And I'm not going to need this much of this fabric, so as I go, once I'm finished, I'm going to cut some of it off. But this is the part that's going to protect against the edge of the corduroy, so that there's less chance of staining while the girl's wearing it. So again, we face to face the fabric so that both outer edges match. So what I do is I come across here about halfway through where the seam is here, I'm going to create a pleat. So my pleat's about 1 inch, and it's just a basic fold over, and I'll just stitch that down, and this is what is needed to be able to make it so that your girl can move. And then when I hit the side seam here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add another little pleat in it. Because these pleats aren't as important as the outer ones, I just kind of measure it blindly as I go. Like I said, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. In the end, it's going to look good. This focusing is going to irritate me, I think. So about halfway through this piece too, I'm going to do the same thing. And your pleating doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. This is the inner lining. Nobody's really going to see it. It's just basically for movement, so they don't have to be flawless. And there's a little wrinkle right there where the center of this is. So that tells me where my middle, where the seam is there in the middle. So I'm just going to add another pleat there. And then halfway from there to my side seam, I'm going to add another one. And then when I hit my side seam, adding another one. And then halfway from there, I'm going to add another one, and you don't have to worry about this back part. The legs usually bend forward more than they do backwards, so we don't really need a pleat at this back center seam. when I reach the edge of the fabric, I always back step, because then it makes it so that my stitch cannot be pulled. And I can show you the difference between that here in just a second. All right, so when I reach the end here, you see I've got all this extra fabric here. So I'm just gonna come to the edge and snip it off. Now I'm not following the line of this because I want this to go straight down. So you'll see it doesn't need to follow this angle. You just want it straight down. So with my extra little piece of fabric, I'm gonna show you a trick here. So my back step is you go forward and then you push your backwards button, backward and then forward again. And then on this part of it, I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to show you the benefit of doing that. So on this side of the fabric, when you open it up, this is where I backstepped it. You can see it doesn't pull open. You can see the little extra fabric there, or a little extra thread, I mean. On this side, however, I didn't backstep. You see how my stitches now are pulling out? It locks your stitches in place so that this doesn't happen and the garment doesn't start to fall apart. So locking your stitch is actually pretty important, because you see how much I just pulled out just by a little bit of tension. It's about an inch worth of space there that now would be a hole. So locking your stitch, super important. All right, so now I have the inner lining part completely done. So you see it's got a little bit of pleating there so that she can move in it just fine. And then this is the top part. Now we're gonna do the outer part. And essentially it's the same thing. The only difference is gonna be when we get to the skirt part. One thing about corduroy is it's kind of like velvet. When cutting it out, sometimes it shifts regardless of how many millions of pins you put into it. So don't worry if there's little blips that come out. It's just from the fuzzies holding each other together when you cut the fabric. Stretchy fabric, you're gonna notice, is gonna do a lot of the same thing. One thing that can help clean up those edges, if it's something that does really bother you, is using your serger. So you can serge these pieces, but with this project, we don't need to serge any of these edges because they're all gonna be inside. So I'm going over just how to do this without having to use the serger, but if you worry about that edge, you want it to be absolutely perfect, just serge it. Now I've got this inner piece. Don't worry about all these little fuzzes that you're gonna get, fabric sheds. That's what the nice little sticky rolly thingies are for. All right, so next part is the little bit more complicated part of this project. So this is the pleated part of the bottom of the skirt. So you noticed when I showed you, when I cut this out, we did twice the length and a little bit more. And my reason for that is because I fold it in half, like so, when we sew it. All right, so here comes the trickier part. The edge piece on the back here. So this part's a little bit more complicated, just a little. This back piece, you want to leave a little bit of extra tail before you start your pleating, and my reasoning for that is because we're going to create one more pleat in the back when we connect this piece to the dress to make it look clean in the back. So the pleats that I make are about 1 inch. So if you look, see how they just kind of overlap. So the easiest thing to do, and this is where I use pins, is once you get that pleat in there, just pin it down like so, and it holds it. See? So I'm going to go across and I'm going to do that for this whole thing. When you come to the next pleat, you're going to pleat the same. This pleat is going to overlap the other pleat just slightly. See? Like so. That creates kind of a clean looking effect without it looking too loose. So when you do all your pleats, they're going to overlap just a tiny bit like that. Alright, so I'm going to go across and I'm going to do this and I'll be back. Okay, so I have all my pleats in place now. You notice I got pins and all of it. At this back end here, there isn't as much of a tail that sticks off, just a little bit here. So from my edge, from my first pleat, it's about 4.5 centimeters there. It's about 1.5 centimeters. But the edge of this right here, this is what you want, because this is about where we're going to end up stitching it. This part of it is going to be on the underneath, so you're not really going to see that. This is going to be completely hidden on the inside of the skirt, so don't worry about that part. Same with this end. Don't worry about that part. Alright, so our next step now is I'm going to secure our pleats in place before I actually sew them onto the garment. So I'm going to stitch with that little bit of seam allowance, and you'll notice that once in a while I'll get this little stick off right there. That does not matter. Nobody's going to see that. Don't let it stress you out. You can always trim it off afterwards if you don't want it on there. The thing that does matter is how this is sitting. So you'll notice I have a few of them that are poking off here, and that's just because it's opening up a little bit from that edge, because right now it's curving out like this. And then you can see that little edge like that. That's pretty normal in a pleated skirt because it creates an angle there. But as you're sewing it, you want to make sure that they're flat like this. And you see how I'm starting to get that curve, and as I come, I'm going to flatten them back out. And I can hold them down with my hand like this as I take the pins out, and that will hold them in place as I'm coming across and sewing. And I will come all the way to the end here because I want to secure these two pieces together too, so that the edge stays with the edge just like we want it. Alright, now I've got those pleats all secured in place. So the next part is attaching it to your skirt piece. Now this outer part, it is important which direction you point these little dudes, because if you point them this way, it makes it look like your front piece is supposed to be in the back. To make your front piece the display, so that your seam sits this direction, you want to make sure to point this towards the front. So each one of these point towards the front like this as you sew it. And I'll show you how I do that when I come across. Like the inner lining didn't matter for that part, but this piece does, because this is your show piece. It's the piece that's going to show on the outside. Alright, so when I come across this, I am going to leave about 1 centimeter's worth of space unsewn right here. That's where we're gonna finish part of this off here, and I'll show you why in a minute. So you'll see this is my little bit of that overhang that I told you, don't worry about that. That's where we can trim that off. So if you need to mark where you're gonna start, you can always take your little chalk dude and do a little chalk line where you want to start your stitching so that you don't accidentally make it too close. We're gonna need this little tail here open for the pleat that we're gonna create in the very back. So I'm gonna line that up with my foot, and then we're gonna start sewing right there. We're gonna attach this to our skirt. Now when I come to this little guy, remember, we need to point him towards the front. So I'm going to hold him this direction as I come across and sew over him. As you come across, you see this comes at a curve and this starts to show through the bottom. That's okay, just correct it. Keep pulling it. It's because this has a curve, this does not. That's okay. That's normal. You're going to find that in a lot of different sewing patterns and different sewing stuff as I go across a lot of different things, because I create most of the patterns for what I make. You'll notice that there's a lot of that to create the curves that you need in garments. So as you come across this, all you got to do is keep pulling it. You'll notice that this end will start pulling towards you. That's okay, that's normal. Alright, so we're coming across this little guy. Remember, point him towards the front. Now as you come across here, sometimes the edge of your foot, you see that? He'll try to grab it. Just lift him a little bit, push it underneath, and keep going. Now as you see, as I make it to the end, this sticks off longer. That's our tail that we saved. You'll notice that it comes across that pleat a little bit. That's exactly what we want it to do. So I come to the end of this piece. I'm going to do the same thing. Where this pleat ends, I'm going to end my stitching. Just like that, because I want this tail. I want that opening so that we can secure our pleat down in the back. Because where the pleats are is going to be closed off. This top part is where we need it open for her legs and booty to come through. And there you have it. You've got your pleats in your skirt on there. And see, they open, they close. That's perfect. At this back part where I've got this open, and cut off my tail. So this is what I'm gonna do. We want this pleat to look nice. So this one stays straight like this. This one, I'm gonna fold it in half. Maybe not quite half. We want it to tuck underneath that edge. You see how our little edges overlap a little bit like this? That's exactly what we want it to do, because when we come across, these are gonna fold like this, and they're gonna overlap a little bit because we want to be able to come up and snap this shut with snaps. So that's exactly what we want to see. This is perfect. So I've got this pinned in place so that this part doesn't move. I'm going to tuck him underneath here. I'm going to move this one out of the way. And I'm going to move this one out of the way so that all I have is that pleat right there. I'm going to line that up so that I don't catch that fabric on this back side, so it's just past it right there. And I'm going to stitch him down. So that completes that back part of the skirt at the top. Now the bottom part of it, you're going to notice, comes apart like this, and this could be a problem. We don't want her little butt sticking out. So what I do to fix that is I'll hold that pleat in place, all I'm gonna do is come across. This is all on the inside. I'm gonna put a tiny little tack at the bottom. You could do this hand sewing too if you want to. That's gonna hold that last pleat in the back in place. Like so. So the next part is attaching our lining to the dress piece. That's where having these loose is gonna come in handy. Oh look, I forgot a tail. All right, so usually I like to start off by doing the top edge. One thing to keep in mind is we have to face this. Putting this inside like this. When I turn the dress inside out, it'll come open like this, and then this will fold inside. I usually have the red piece inside out. This one's technically inside right, so we want the outside and outside to face each other. So you want the seam on this side and the seam on this side. And I'm just going to come across and I'm going to stitch these two tops together. Now remember, your red piece on the outside, it matters which direction that seam goes. So as you approach this right here, make sure it doesn't turn the opposite direction. Make sure he still faces towards that middle, because that's what you want. For your inner lining, you can see where I stitched it here. He wants to face that way. That one doesn't matter. It's your outer one. Make sure the outer one faces that middle. Now I'm approaching this again. See how he's trying not to face the middle? I'm gonna fix that. Point him towards the middle. All right. So I'm coming up on the very back. And as I come up on the back, I'm going to lock my stitch here, and then I'm going to turn like this. Now this is where our little tail comes in handy, because we want that here. We're going to do some hand sewing after this to stick down. Like so. Now these little corners that come up like this, because we have a point here, what you want to do with those here, these little corners like this, you're gonna end up with a lot of bulk in here if you don't do that, which can make this end up more rounded than you want it to be. So what you do is you just snip it off like that. And that's going to make it so that you don't end up with too much bulk when you turn it inside right. All right. So I'm going to come up with the second side here. And you could always start it down here if you want to. It's really up to you. I don't know why, but I just like doing it this way better. And that finishes off that second edge there. I'm going to take off our tail. And another tail. And then again, this one we're going to take that point off there. So when we turn it inside right, it looks good. Alright, so now we're about to do that. So I'm going to turn everything inside right. You're going to notice two clean sides of the fabric. So once you got it at this stage, you just shove that lining in there. And then this is the part where you pull that little corner out. So what I like to do is I'll stick my finger in there like this, and then I'll push with my other finger like this and shove it out the other side. You got a nice clean point there when you turn it inside right. So at this point what you could do is you could iron this and not do a top stitch along this top part, leaving it clean, which I think is what I'm going to do with this one this time. You'll notice your iron is your friend in a lot of sewing stuff. I've got a small one and a big one. Alright, so now when you see the back, I've got this little open piece here where we're going to use that for our snap to close here. Alright, so for this back part here I got my hand sewing needle, I got my thread that matches set up in here. Now I'll line this edge up here like so. I'm going to fold this in like this. Make sure that's tucked in there, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide my knot underneath this pleat. I'll come up here like this. Then I'm going to create an invisible stitch. It's going to pull these two pieces together. And all I'm doing is grabbing a little bit of fabric from each side to create that invisible stitch. And then I'll come to the edge here like this. And that's where the pieces are gonna attach together right there. And once I hit that edge, I'm gonna come up and do the invisible stitch up these two pieces of fabric too, because this very end here wasn't attached together and we want it to be. And this will close off this corner here. Alright, when I hit the end, what I do to tie a knot is I'll take my loops, I'll come through, tighten, come through, tighten, and then I pull the whole needle through and tighten it. And then I'll take the needle to hide the tail. Take the needle to hide the tail, come through just the seam there, and come up. It's trying to grab my pleats. And then just snip it off. Right there, the tail will be inside the skirt. Alright, now we need to do the other side. Alright, so this other side we want to actually overlap with this side. So we've got the little tail on the skirt part. I actually cut some of the threads here because I forgot to leave that. So we want this skirt part to stay inside when we overlap this outside. You see we got a little bit of this fabric, don't worry about that, because we're actually going to fold that edge inside, and we're going to do an invisible stitch again on this side of it to hide all of that inside. So we're actually going to come across, and I'm going to hide my knot underneath that same pleat as I did before. I'm going to grab that end like this, and I'm going to secure that down pretty good. So I'm going to put 2 stitches in there, like so. I'm going to hold that flat against here. Have a little bit of a ruffle right there. When I iron that out, that'll be good. And I'm just going to come in and do an invisible stitch again through here. Alright, to hide the knot for this one, I'm just going to do it underneath of the pleat on this side. So I'm going to come down under here like that. You'll notice my thread is right there. So I'm just going to catch a small piece of the fabric. Do 1, do 2. Pull the needle through. Now I have a knot. Nice secure knot. And then I'm going to cut that off. And ta-da! It's hidden underneath, and now we've got that overlap right here that we want. But we're not done yet. On the very inside, so we're going to turn our dress inside out. We still have this issue to resolve. So you'll notice that we've got the clean edge where the overlap and stuff is, and then we've got this little tail here for this. What you're gonna do is just turn that inside out. And then you're gonna stitch it closed. Alright, one last thing. have going on is that one little spot that I cut open here now, where I needed that little extra tail sticking out here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of fold that. I'm going to stitch that back closed again. So there's our back inner piece sealed up. I'm going to turn it back inside right. Alright, so from here, our next step is to put on some snaps. So what I'll typically do when I put on snaps is I'll measure about halfway up and then I'll put one at the top, so it only needs 2. It's completely up to you if you want to use more than that or not. I think I'm going to use some black snaps. One thing I also do when I put the snaps on is, because you don't see this inner part where the inner snaps are, I'm going to use white thread to put that on so that we don't have little pieces of black thread here against the doll's skin. On this part of it though, because this part doesn't touch the doll's skin, I can actually use the red thread that matches the skirt. So I'm going to put that together and I'll be back. Alright, so my snaps are in place. You can kind of see back here. So they snap closed where we need them to be so that the little butt doesn't stick out. Ta-da! Alright, so we're almost completely done with our skirt. The last part is putting on the buttons. And as I stated earlier, I have decided to use these cute little red flowers for this one. And I'm going to use white thread because flowers have different colored centers. I used a cream colored tan thread for the buttons on the other one that I made because they were brown buttons. So I'm going to do the same pattern as I did for the other ones, 3 down each side. What I do to decide where they go is just kind of eyeball it. I want them to go at a little bit of an angle because this has an angle here. So what I'll do is I'll grab a pin and I'll place it where I want them to be. And then I'll do the same thing for the other side. This allows me to kind of eyeball it and see. It looks a little too close together. So I'm going to move it over just a little. That looks better. So I'm going to place my buttons there. And then I'll be back. And there we are. All the buttons have been added. Now, there was one last step that I remember we need to take. The back of this is not going to sit flat against the small of their back if we don't do this. What you need to do is you need to make a small dart. A dart that only comes about 1.5 inches down the back. So this is the back part. What you do is you fold it in half here so the little seam matches here and here. So now you got this little edge. You want to make sure that your inside piece here too is sitting flat also, and that it's not bumping out or wrinkling or anything like that, because this pleat's going to go through both of these layers of fabric. And then what you're going to do is you're going to come in. And we don't need a very big pleat. So when you come in and do the pleat, it doesn't need to be very big. So when I angle this, I actually angle it so that it just matches out here. Then I lock my stitch, come up down, This guy wants to be a pain in the butt. There we go. An inch and a half, and come off and lock the stitch. Now when we come back through here, you'll see we've got a nice pleat in the back. This comes around so that this sits against the small of their back and their little booty sits in there better. So you do that to both sides of the back. Alright, so there we go. We've got pleats down now, both sides. Alright. Now for the final reveal. Alright, so here we are. The amazing, the beautiful, the wonderful Abby Futaba is decided to model our skirt. Doesn't she look absolutely fabulous? She's wearing one of CJ's shirts with it, which match really nicely. She's so cute. She's wearing some of Summer's eyes, and I got that wig off of Amazon, I think. Or maybe it's a cotton doll wig. I can't remember. Don't judge me. She loves it. That's what matters. Look how pleased she is. This is good. We must please the smart dolls. It's so cute. Alright, so I'm going to turn her around. You can see. Hopefully she won't tip over because she likes to do that. I'm going to move her hair out of the way. See how her stand sits just above the back of the skirt? It looks fantastic. She's got enough movement and everything in it to be able to pose and be cute and be fabulous and all the good stuff that we love to do with our girls. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to PM me on Facebook. You can also message on YouTube. Like and share if you want me to post some more of these kinds of videos. We'll see you guys later. Bye.